In Luke chapter 15, there's really three illustrations that Jesus gave in response to a conversation that he was listening to. And one had to do with lost sheep. The other had to do with a lost coin. And then the third story that we're going to finish up today had to do with the father and two lost sons. Now, I went and talked about the youngest son on Father's Day. I called it the Fabulous Father. So if you haven't heard that message, you might want to go back and listen to it as a refresher. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and read the whole story this morning. But today we're going to concentrate on the older son. So I thought I'd get started today with just a small survey. It's not hard. It's not difficult. Some of you will be right in, and others of you will like, well, that doesn't pertain to me. It's real simple as this. How many of you are the oldest child in your family? Let me see your hands. All right. Pretty amazing. Oldest child in your family. Okay, that's good. How many of you are the youngest in your family? Well, we have a little more older child than we have younger child. You're actually, yeah. I'm one, okay? I'm the youngest, even though I have a younger brother that died in childbirth. I look forward to seeing him in heaven, but he's 2 years younger than me. And they didn't officially give him a name, but I understood they were going to name him Michael Maxwell. It's pretty intense, isn't it? It's great. So I'll see him in heaven. But he's 2 years younger than I am. He died in childbirth. And so I'm the youngest in my family of 6. Now, I don't know if you've dug into the whole idea of a birth order. Kevin Lehman did groundbreaking research back in probably the 70s or 80s. And particularly what he did was he noticed certain characteristics about the oldest child, and then the next, and then the middle child, and then he went in the birth order, and there were certain characteristics about the oldest and the youngest and those in between that he began to observe as he did surveys and interviews and so forth. Incidentally, these two boys have characteristics of the oldest and the youngest. Let me read them to you. Let me just, I'll read you the characteristics and then we'll get into the story. Lehman found that the firstborn are responsible, organized, ambitious. They matured well. They were self-disciplined and often became leaders. They were good students, standard bearers, and they also conformed well and honored other authorities around them. They exhibited conventional views of most matters. All right, that's characteristics of the older child. The youngest, this was the characteristics that he said, the youngest child, according to birth order, is the most likely to be rebellious, be creative, attention-seeking, manipulative, and often very socially outgoing. That's the youngest. So if you know the story that I'm going to read here in a few moments, you'll say, well, wait a minute, this older son had characteristics of exactly what is described in the birth order, and the youngest son had characteristics exactly what is described in the birth order. Now, I think when Jesus moves in, everything just kind of gets thrown up and reshuffled. It's not that we have to stick with those characteristics like a personality test. It might describe a bit, it might explain a little bit of who you are, but it doesn't excuse who you are. Did you get that? It doesn't excuse your behavior. It might explain it a little bit, but it doesn't excuse it. Well, let's jump in and read the story and get into the outline this morning and see. I've entitled the message, The Older Son's Dilemma. But I'm going to read, I'm going to start just from verse 11 of chapter 15, Luke, and just read so you can get familiar with what happened with the younger son, and then we'll jump in to the older son. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set out for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And then he came to his senses, and he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' And so he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. And the son said to his father, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. This son of mine that was dead is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And so they begin to celebrate. And here we come to today's story. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked him, 'What is going on?' 'Your brother has come,' he replied. 'Your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him?' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me. Everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" What an amazing story. The first thing I want to bring to your attention is that both sons started from a field. The younger son was in a field feeding pigs. The older son was in a field tending to the crops, what he was supposed to be doing, what he was called to do. And I've obviously put the field in parentheses to illustrate that I believe that the older son came from a field of methods. He was centered on the right method, the right rules. And the younger son came from a field of messes. He had messed up his life many times. In fact, it doesn't say one field, it says fields of pigs. So many messes in his life. Characteristic of the younger son, the birth order, many messes, rebellious, creative, free child. The older son, I stayed at home. I did what was right. I stood by my father. I'm doing the right thing. And you let him back? He came from a field of methods, while the younger son came from a field of messes. Now the question that we have to ask ourselves is, which field did you come from? Which field did I come from? Because we can grow up in the church and good Christian family, and we can develop in our thinking and understanding certain methods that people have to get through, hurdles they have to jump through if they've come from the field of messes. And people that come from the world that have created a lot of messes and they would like to come to the house, both came back to the house, from their field, that the people with messes need some order in their life in order to get the messes worked out. They need the people with the methods. But sometimes they're thinking, because it's been so filled with messes, that they resent some kind of order in their life, of a method. So the older son had the method that he wanted to be true to, and the younger son had the messes. One and I took some training with the Dove Ministries, and Larry Crowder was teaching. And one of the things that he really stressed this time around was that methods must change, but values must stay the same. Methods change over time, but values must stay the same. For instance, 50 years ago, the methods that we used to do church, or the songs that we sang, or the ways that we tried to reach people are much different then than they are today. But yet the message has to stay the same. There's sinners 50 years ago, we used different methods. There's still sinners today that want to come to the house. But we have different methods that we use. If you're not using the internet today, you're losing out of a way of communicating with people, even in business today. If you're not using the internet of communicating with people, however little or much you use it, if you're not using it all, that's a method that God has given us to reach people. And so we need to understand and use it wisely, and use it in a way that God intends. I saw several years ago that the trend was going to online giving. And so I went to my folks and I said, you know what? It's great to receive the offering every Sunday morning, but we got to go to online giving. And I had a little resistance, but then the reality came on to say, you know what? We have to do that. And now we receive a lot of tithes that come online because the method has changed. I don't know if we'll get to the place where we'll put a kiosk in the back. That scares me a little bit. But the fact is, it's just a method. The importance is, are we tithing? Are we being generous? It's just a method. It's a little place that you go and put it. It's nothing sacred about the plate. It's a method. Some people, they receive the offering, they have baskets up here, and everybody does a dance. Chris was telling me this week that he was in a place where he got up and he wanted to go to the bathroom, and he got caught up in the dance going to take the offering. He said it was, kind of awkward. He just wanted to go to the restroom, and it just got swallowed up by the offering dance. It's just a method that we have, and yet sometimes we get so caught up in the methods that they become sacred to us, and we don't realize that people are just coming in from messes, and they need some order, but don't let the methods be set up as such rigid rules that the people with the messes can't get in. Once we moved to Winchester, I really had not been around very many people in the recovery community. My former pastorate, I don't know, we just didn't have people that used alcohol. I'm just kidding. No drugs down them. No, just kidding. But I just wasn't around people in the recovery community until I got to Winchester. And we had, some of you are involved in it now, and I try to show up at the drug coalition that's been formed to help eradicate drugs from the community and awareness and so forth, try to participate as much as I can. And so one of the things that I noticed is that when I would get around these folks, they would say, I'm 20 years in recovery. I'm 30 years in recovery. I'm 35 years in recovery. And that used to bother me. We had an elder that was involved in the recovery community. And finally I went to him, I said, Matt, you're not tempted by alcohol anymore. You've recovered. God has set you free. What are you using this terminology? You're still in recovery. And he goes, oh, that's simple. That's for the new person in. Sure, I've recovered. I've been set free. I would never go back and take a drink. But I use the terminology, I'm still in recovery, because the guy that's messed up royally has so twisted his thinking, he would never step in the door if everybody in the room would say, I'm recovered, how about you? Come on in. They would never step in. But they changed the method the terminology to say, I'm in recovery, and the new person that is struggling says, maybe I can find some help with my mess. So we have two different perspectives here. And we have to realize where we come from. And we in the church, we're like the Pharisees. The Pharisees had their methods, they had their rules. And if you notice the first verse in the chapter, it was the Pharisees and the sinners and the tax collectors all crowding around Jesus. And the sinners and the tax collectors, how can I get in? And the Pharisees were saying, how can I keep them out? And obviously the sinners and the tax collectors are related to the younger son with a lot of mess. And the Pharisees related to the older son. I have my methods. I'm going to keep them out. And so we have to recognize that this older son, the firstborn, he was very principle-centered, very, very method-centered. And the lastborn was just really free and creative and wanted to do things his way and ended up creating a lot of mess. So which characterizes you? Are you a methods person or are you a mess person? I'll let you talk about that over lunch. Number 2, the older son is estranged from his father as well. Many of you probably realize that. Verse 26, it says, so he called the servants. He called one of the servants. Now that word servants is not a mature man. It actually means a young boy. So it was probably an 8 to 10-year-old boy that was running around outside enjoying the music. And the older son came up and spotted the young boy and said, tell me what's going on. So it wasn't one of the mature servants. It was actually a young kid that he asked, what's going on in there? I hear music and dancing. What's that all about? And so this young boy knew exactly what was happening. He says, your brother's come home, he replied, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound. Now you would think that the older brother would be so overjoyed that he would go into the bathroom, change his field clothes, put on his tuxedo, and come out and start dancing that his younger brother had come home, right? Would we expect that? We would hope that. But is that what happened? No, that's not what happened. He didn't change over and go, wow, I'm in. He chose to get secondhand information rather than going to his father. You know, secondhand information is not necessarily wrong unless it's bad information. If you're always seeking information instead of going to the person yourself, oh, what did they say? Well, what did you hear? Yeah, that's probably an indication the enemy's already working with our mind. If we're just trying to get information second-handedly rather than going first. And I know that sometimes it's not possible, but if it be possible, as much as it depends on us, I think we should go to get first-hand information. Go straight. And eventually he got there. He got to the father, but he didn't start out there. He started from what was safe. This young boy running around outside. And he said, tell me what's going on. And so he chose to get secondhand information. Now the phrase safe and sound, he's back safe and sound, actually means that the younger son has peace again and he's in a household of peace. Makes sense, doesn't it? Younger son's come home. He's repented of his messes that he royally messed up. The father forgave him. They're having a party. And he's actually had peace in his heart. And so when we come in from our field, whatever field we come from, and we repent before God and we ask him to set us free, and he does, we get peace. And we get peace in the household. I don't know if any of you grew up and one of your parents became Christian and so forth, and maybe both of your parents did. But I would imagine something changed in the household when both submitted their lives to Christ. A peace came into the household that wasn't there before. Now, the other thing that happened is that the older son, the father comes out after he finds out what's going on with the boy. Then the father comes out to talk to the older son. Now, normally when this is happening, you need to understand that the party that was going on was not about the younger son. It was about the father. That people that came to the celebration and dancing didn't go to the younger son saying, "Glad to have you back, son. I hope you learned your lesson, son." They were actually going to the father, congratulating the father. "Congratulations, father, your son's back. Congratulations, father, accept him." In other words, the father was the center of the celebration, not the son. And so when the father sees the older son out through the portico, he's not coming in, he's talking to this young boy, and he sees his older son wait and not come in, not start rejoicing. The father says, "I'm going to go out there and talk to him." Now what happened, because the father is the center of the party, everything stopped. The band stopped playing. Conversation stopped. People's heads started watching. Eyes started zeroing in on the father. What's the father doing? Because the father is the central figure in the celebration. And so everything would have stopped in the party. And they're now watching this dad walk out to his older son. And they wonder what's going to happen. The reality is that the older son embarrassed the father more than the younger son. Because the older son embarrassed the father in public. And then it went private. The younger son started out in private and then went public. So the older son actually embarrassed the father in a greater way than the younger son did. Because the party ceased, everybody's watching, wondering what's going to happen. Now, normally in the culture, without God involved, if a son would have embarrassed his dad to that degree, he would have grabbed his security team and said, "Take that son and put him into a room and lock him up. I'm going to deal with him after the party's over." And he would have brought him out the next day in front of his family and friends and belittled him, even beaten him, said, "Don't you ever embarrass me in public again." That's normally what the culture would have done. But is that what the father did? No, not at all. He went out and had a conversation with his older son, his firstborn. And so in that conversation that he has with him, just read it here for a little refreshment. Verse 28. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. This is a new word, not new in Scripture. The father never pleaded with the younger son, but he pleaded with the older son. What does it mean? It means that he came near and called him forth. That's what the word plead means in Greek. He came near and called him forth. He pleaded with the older son. What did he say to his older son? But he answered his father. Now this is the older son talking. "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders." Boy, what a methods guy. I've done the rules. I've done the methods. I haven't messed up. This brother of mine, he messed up, but I kept the rules. I did the methods. He goes on and he says, "I never disobeyed your order. Yet you never gave him even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends." Look, this older brother, he's more interested in hanging out with his friends than the father. So I don't know if he's any closer to the father than the younger son was. "You never supplied a goat for me and my friends to hang out with." He's like, "It's your fault, Dad." "But when this son of yours has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him." The next thing that I say there for you is that the reaction of anger causes exaggeration. Who told him that the younger son went out and spent his inheritance on prostitutes? Nobody. He dreamed that up because he got angry. He assumed that. Nobody had told him anything. He got angry, and so in his anger, he started dreaming up lies. And that's what happens when we get angry. The Bible says, be angry and sin not. It is possible to get angry and not sin, but most of the time, we get angry and we sin. We end up letting the things out of our mouth that we wouldn't necessarily say otherwise unless we get angry. And this older son did the same. He was getting angry and exaggerating. He says, this brother of yours, or this son of yours, doesn't say his brother. I don't think there were two moms involved. Same mom. So he was related, but he's not owning him. We get angry, we say things, we exaggerate things, we think up things that really aren't there. I remember my first pastorate, probably 5 years in, I was in a situation with a senior pastor and a whole bunch of other pastors, and I was in a situation where I was complimented one week and then corrected the next week. And complimented one week and corrected the next week. I didn't really know how to walk forward in pastoring because it seemed like the senior pastor, I did something right and was applauded, and then the next week I would step on a landmine and it would explode. And so I walked through a period of time through the season, and how it affected me, I just began to get bitter and angry and felt I was in an unjust situation and trapped and couldn't get out of it. That's the level that I reached. I was a mess. During that time, Wanda and I attended an international revival that was going on, and the second night, what happened is the Lord spoke to me about my sin. He said, Bobby, you simply put yourself underneath this senior pastor, and you've not allowed me to be God. You've allowed him to be God over you and not me to be God over you. Simple as that. I saw it as my sin. I couldn't wait to get to the altar that night, and I ran and repented before the Lord, and I put him first. I put him on top. Because I realized the very thing that I was trapped under, that I would get sucked into. And I would get angry about it and upset and bitter because I had placed the senior pastor where God needed to be. And so I got prayer for 5 or 6 people that night, and I told the Lord, I said, you got to change me because I can't change me. I cannot change myself. You've got to change me. And he did. I walked out of there a different person than the way I came in. And Wanda and I went back and we served that ministry 1 full year with no agenda. Laid it down. Said, we're here for you, God. We're working for God now, not the senior pastor. Laid it down. Said, after that year, we knew that it was time for us to go. God was calling us out. The senior pastor said, I've seen the changes that you've made, but I don't believe any of them. What would you do with that? I wasn't there to please him. I was there to please God. Now, the other fascinating thing is there were other pastors that were leaving during that time, but Wanda and I were the only ones that left with blessing. The others that left, they were talked about. They were they were discussed. They were the ones that were doing things wrong. They were prematurely leaving. But Wanda and I, when we left with blessing. Why? Because I got free of that offense. Now, 20 years later, you say, what have I learned? I was reflecting upon that. 20 years later, how does that affect me now in ministry? Crossroads is 20 years old. I really don't get offended very long. I mean, people do offend me at times. Just, let's be open. But I don't hold on to it very long. I'm not taking that. I don't know what they meant. It affected me this way. But offense, you're not coming on me because I know what that's like to live that way. That's a horrible way to live. I'm not living that way. Get out of here. And I just get free. As soon as I recognize it, I just get free. And it's really a great way to live. You ought to try it sometimes. Those of you that take up offense is easy. You ought to try it. It's really a great way to live. That as soon as you recognize you're offended by someone, just say, Lord, I forgive them. I'm walking in freedom. Teach me how to bless them. Just walk in freedom. And I realized that experience from that one night in that revival of what God did just trailed with me through my whole rest of my ministry of just not walking in offense. It's just not worth it. And it's a super, super way to give. But this older son, I don't know that he learned that lesson. And so the father, number 3, the father gives grace to his older son, yet restates his purpose. Interestingly, the father didn't correct the older son. Oh, that's not true. He didn't go with prostitutes. I talked with him earlier tonight. Oh, he didn't see it. He didn't correct him. He restated who he was and what his intentions were. You see, if the father had become codependent on the older son, what would have happened is that he would have heard his older son that was resistant coming in, and he would have said, you know what, you're having a really rough time. I think I need to go back and say, okay, band, you can't play any more lively music. You got to play soaking music for the rest of the night, and we just got to tone this thing down because my older son is having a problem in celebration of his younger brother. I think we just got to tone it down. We're just going to chill for the rest of the night, and then we'll see if things will work out in the morning. Is that what the father did? No. The father was very clear with the older son. You're my son. You've been with me, absolutely. But the father had enough maturity to say, older son, you may not like it. You may be angry. You may be offended. But we're going to celebrate because my son came home. He was lost and is found. He wasn't codependent on the older son. He was saying, we're going to celebrate. Now, it's interesting that the play stops there. The last scene is unspoken. Verse 33 goes on to something else. So maybe we need to take a vote this morning. Did the older son come in or did he not? Let's look at 2 possibilities. So one ending could have read, and the older son embraced his father, and they entered the house and were reconciled to his brother and to his father, and the father celebrated with all night with his 2 sons. That would be one ending. We don't know. Here's the second ending. Do you like alternate endings? You do? I don't. Here's the second possibility. Upon hearing his father's response, upon hearing his father restate the reason for the party, the older son turned and fumed off to the stables and sulked there in one of the stalls until morning and went back out and worked the field, still holding a grudge against his father and brother. So which one do you think happened? Jesus doesn't tell us. He doesn't tell us whether or not the older son came in or whether the older son stayed out. Pretty interesting. See, he brought the storyline to the place where the audience had to come in and decide. The Pharisees had to decide. The sinners had to decide. He put them in a place to say, what do you want? The Father can handle both. He can handle the people with messes. He can handle the people with methods. And he's the central figure that brings the 2 together. As the audience, we must decide, did the older brother come in or did he stay out? How many say he came in? How many say he stayed out? All right. Kind of divided here this morning. We don't know. But we have a choice. We don't know what the older brother decided, but we have a choice. Whether or not to leave our field and come into the house. Whether we have the field of the mess or the field of the methods. We still come into the house with the Father. Celebrate with the Father. What do we get from this story? 3 things. And wrapping up. Remember, each one of us came from a field. We either come from a field of rules and regulations or we come from a field of mess. Those of us with principle-centered methods, don't let it become fences that people have to hurdle over in order to get in. Yet at the same time, if you come from a field of a mess, don't resent those who have some order in their life. Learn from it. Say, how can I get some of that? Because maybe I won't make a bigger mess next time. Number 2, we can become estranged from the Father having grown up in church. Just as easily as the person who was never connected to church or maybe was for a period of time and then left and wants to come back, we that have never strayed, never left, we can get just as estranged from the Father as those that have left when we hang on to our methods and principles rather than let God show us how to receive from Him and receive back others. And then finally, let's not back down from our purpose of welcoming all kinds of people. Yet at the same time, still have a clear biblical foundation from what we teach from. Our methods are going to change. They're going to change over time. And whether or not we're comfortable with them doesn't necessarily, we all have our preferences, but whether or not we're comfortable with them doesn't necessarily mean that it's not God. But we cannot compromise our message. We cannot compromise our value, our biblical foundations. And today in the church, it feels like that they're compromising both. They're changing methods and changing the fundamental Word of God. And you know what's going to happen if we continue to do that? It's going to be one big mess, if it's not already. Let's pray.